We are live. What is up, fight nerds and dirty gamblers? I am Erik. This is Erik Bets Fights. I feel very rusty, so hopefully this will go okay. It's been we're just coming off an off week, and I just looked at my YouTube page here, and it's been a full 2 weeks since my last video. So I didn't do anything at all in the off week. I know some people find a way to sneak an episode in there. I did not do that. I took the week off. So yeah, 2 weeks since I made a video, but I am back. Uh, it's awesome to see all of you here. I am recording this as a live stream, but I'm doing it as a private live stream, so it will upload as soon as I am done, and then I'll share it around. And I imagine a few of the usual suspects will be in here taking a look. So I appreciate all of you who do come back week after week and watch these videos. This will be my full card breakdown for UFC Vegas 62. It's the card headlined by Alexa Grasso versus Viviane Araujo. It's I don't know, it's kind of a weird card. There's some fun fights on here though. I've heard a lot of people kind of talking crap about it, but if you've been watching my stuff for a while, you know that I don't really even differentiate between cards. I mean, when there's a card that's super good, like obviously that will stand above a little bit, but as far as like fight night cards and stuff and some like lower level pay-per-views, I don't even really, I never find myself being like, oh, this is a crappy card. And I think it's because I'm an old school fan for like when, back when I first started watching UFC, there was an event every like 3 months, so we had to wait a long time. So like it was always a waiting game. Like at any given time, I could tell you the date that the next UFC was happening and the date that the next UFC DVD was coming out in stores, because I would drive to Media Play and buy it the day it came out. So like I just feel, I sound like an old man standing out. You kids don't understand what it was like in our day, but like I will never complain about the quality of a UFC card because we get cards every week. And after spending so much time having to wait 2-3 months, and then they were usually doing a card every month, now that there's one every week, I will never complain. I think it's awesome. Like I enjoy bad cards, I enjoy crappy cards. I really don't care when there's high level MMA to be watched. We'll put quotes around high level with some, especially this first fight we're going to talk about here, but you know what I mean. Relatively speaking, high level. So yeah, I'm never going to complain about the quality of a card. I love all of it. So anyway, I am in the middle of my workday right now, so I'm not going to waste too much time. I know I just blabbed for a long time, but hey, that's what I do. I'm not going to do a recap of the last event. I will just let you know it was a small losing event for me. I lost, I think, 0.34 units, so very small losing event. I didn't do very good. I think I went 2-4 on my money line bets, and then I had some props and parlays that helped me out a little bit, and ended up with just a small loss there. But we're going to go ahead and just jump right into this card. I'm going to go through each fight and give you my breakdown for it. Some I'm going to do pretty quickly, some I might go into a little more depth on. And then at the end, we'll take a look at what bets I do have placed for this card so far. Bear with me here. My old ass tries to remember how StreamYard works. Add to stream. There we go. There we go. We got it. I got to get my notes up here. And all right. So our first fight, yeah, I put some quotes around high level here. First fight of the night is going to be Mike Jackson versus Pete Rodriguez. Gang, I'm not going to mince words here. This is probably the lowest level fight that the UFC could put together right now. People always talk about how the level is very low in women's MMA. I think this is a lower level fight than even something like Julia Stoliarenko versus Chelsea Chandler was. I mean, I think this is arguably a lower level fight than you could put together even in any of the women's divisions. And I'm not trying to talk crap about either of these guys, but the fact of the matter is Mike Jackson is not even really a professional fighter. This has been talked about ad nauseum. I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. He's really more of a media guy and a photographer. He used to do photography work for Mick Maynard. So they've known each other for a long time. They needed somebody to come in and fight Mickey Gall. Mickey Gall only had, I think, one pro fight under his belt at that time. So they needed somebody who was at that level as far as their skill and their experience. And that's the only reason Mike Jackson even ended up in the UFC, really. And now he's on his fourth fight. So he fought Mickey Gall. He fought CM Punk. And then he fought Dean Barry. And now he's fighting Pete Rodriguez. So he's fought very, very low level competition. And he's only won once against Dean Barry. And that was only because of very fluky circumstances. And I will say this, folks, I did bet Mike Jackson there at plus 750. Not because I thought he was going to win, But I'm a guy who, when the numbers get out of hand like that, a lot of times I'm just going to take a shot on it. You know, when you start getting up into plus 750 and stuff like that, when you start getting into, especially a situation like that, like Dean Barry and Mike Jackson, two guys who are pretty low level, if you're going to put two, relatively low level guys in there together and tell me that one of them is like a 10-1 favorite over the other, I'm going to take that shot on the guy who's like a 7 or 8-1 underdog. I'm going to do that. And this is one of those spots where, frankly, the lines are getting close to that. This shows, Tapology is always a little bit behind. This shows Pete Rodriguez at minus 650, Mike Jackson at plus 470. I've got Fads.io up here. Yeah, you can. Yeah, Mike or Pete Rodriguez is out there minus 700, minus 750. Mike Jackson can be had for as high as plus 531. Actually, he can be had even higher than that. Yeah, fight odds. Okay. See, I used to use best fight odds. They don't have William Hill on here. FightOdds.io doesn't have William Hill on here either. I just looked at William Hill a little bit ago and he was plus 550. I love the William Hill app because I often get better lines than you can find on any other book. So that's kind of exciting. Anyway, as far as a breakdown, I'm not going to get too, guys. I didn't even do the tape for this fight. If you read my written breakdown, you already know that. I'm going to go ahead and drop a plug for that while we're at it. Check out the Never Hedge Substack if you haven't yet. I don't even know the URL off the top of my head, but if you search Never Hedge, just one word works better. Never Hedge Substack and like newsletter or whatever, it'll come up. Basically, it's a free email newsletter that you can subscribe to. It doesn't cost you anything. And you get tape study notes and betting guides and all kinds of cool things. I put my tape study notes on there every week. Kyle Miller, who kind of started the whole Never Hedge thing, he puts out tape study notes and betting guides. He even puts out like recipes for like, hey, here's a snack you can make on fight day and stuff. Anyway, it's totally free. So check it out. Anyway, and so that's a way that, after you watch this video, you can supplement a little bit. I'm going to make a lot of the same points in the video that I make in my written breakdown. But anyway, if you want to consume some written content from me, you can do that there as well. But Mike Jackson, like I said, he's not even really a guy who's necessarily pursuing a career as a professional fighter. At least that's not the sense I get. He's kind of just doing it on the side. At the very least, even though I don't think highly of Pete Rodriguez's skill set, he's at least a guy who's trying to make his living as a professional fighter. He was given this opportunity much too early. He was brought into the UFC, I think, late notice against Jack Della Maddalena. Rodriguez only had, I think, 4 pro fights. I think maybe like 10 fights total because he did have an amateur career as well. But yeah, all things considered, Mike Jackson does not have a UFC level skill set, and it's arguable whether Pete Rodriguez does either. One thing I will say about Pete Rodriguez, though, is that if you include his pro and his amateur, he has 11 wins. 10 of those wins are by round 1 knockout. So this is a guy against very low level competition, but again, he's fighting pretty low level competition here. So Pete Rodriguez is a guy who, doesn't have a super deep game. He's going to get in there and he's going to throw heavies and try to get you out of there in the first round. That's his game. There's not a whole lot more depth to it than that. However, he's pretty good at it against low level competition, right? He's proven that. So, am I going to take a shot on Mike Jackson at plus 550 here? I haven't yet. It's possible that I will. I really do think the most likely outcome for this fight is that Pete Rodriguez does find that round 1 KO. However, Mike Jackson does have some size and some length here. He's got 5 inches, I guess only an inch of reach, but he's got 5 inches of height and an inch of reach here. He can move pretty well. If he's able to kind of stay on the outside and move and keep Pete Rodriguez from really being able to land anything big in the first round, are we potentially going to see Rodriguez slow down and maybe Mike Jackson could take over late? I've seen the number out there, Mike Jackson by decision sitting at like plus 1800 or something somewhere. Like this is one of those fights that everybody thinks it's going to go under, but if it goes past that first round where Pete Rodriguez is especially dangerous, do we see it go long? Do we see Mike Jackson take this to a decision potentially? I don't know, something to consider. But I absolutely will not touch Pete Rodriguez at minus 700, minus 750. Even if you look, usually when the odds are that wide, you start looking to props, right? Even if you looked at his props, I just looked earlier today. Pete Rodriguez by KO in round 1 is at like minus 140. You're getting a minus sign in him to finish picking a method end around. So yeah, I'm not interested in touching that either. So for me, all of the value is squarely on the dog here. If I was going to bet anything, I'd be betting Mike Jackson. But at the moment, it's going to be a stay away for me. I talked about that fight way longer than it really than that fight deserves, probably. But next up, we've got CJ Vergara versus Tatsuro Tyra. Let's see. It shows Tyra at minus 240, Vergara at plus 195. I think that's actually a little bit wider now. I think Tyra might be up around like minus 270. Let's find out here. Tyra, okay, he can be had for minus 225. Vergara can be had for as high as plus 205. All right, it doesn't move a whole lot. Uh so yeah, looking at one of the first things that stands out here when you look at this fight is Tyra's 22 years old, Vergara's 31. Tyra he's a very very young prospect. However, if you look at his pro and his amateur, he's got over 20 fights under his belt already. He's one of those dudes who made his MMA debut as an amateur when he was like 15, 16 years old, something like that. He had already had like I don't know. I looked at this earlier. I don't have the notes in front of me. He already had like something like 7 fights under his belt, I think, by the time he was 18 years old. So I mean, the kid's been doing this for a while. But and for a 22-year-old, he's got 20 fights. That's a lot of experience. So at what point does the fact that he's 22 not really matter? So that's something to think about. And he's a very highly touted prospect, and I think for good reason. The UFC is looking to build Asian talent, looking to build Japanese talent. He's probably one of the more impressive and skilled Japanese prospects that the UFC has on the roster at the moment. I would say grappling is kind of his key skill, but he's pretty well rounded. He strikes reasonably well. He employs kind of a kick heavy striking game, but when he throws punches, he throws the way you'd expect an athletic 22-year-old kid to throw, I guess. He throws pretty nice, crisp, straight punches. He doesn't look too bad on the feet. His wrestling isn't fantastic overall, but he does have a quick shot. He can shoot a nice quick takedown. He again, like I said, he's an athletic 22-year-old kid. He's gonna have some explosion and some quickness to him. But yeah, grappling would really be his main skill, but by no means a fish out of water with the wrestling, with the takedowns, with the striking. He's pretty reasonably well rounded. As a grappler, he scrambles really, really well. He's a really, really good positional grappler. Like I said, not a fantastic wrestler, but he's kind of one of those grapplers who doesn't need to be. If he gets inside on you, even if he's not able to, finish some big throw or some big takedown or some big trip, he's one of those guys, kind of like we see Mackenzie Dern do. He'll just scramble to your back without even taking you down. He'll just scramble into a position and force you into a grappling exchange with him, even if he's not able to get a takedown. And one thing I noticed watching the tape on Tyra is, it could just be that kind of, a lot of people raised in Asian cultures tend to be a little bit more stoic, I guess, and that kind of thing. It could just be a cultural thing like that. But I noticed that he's very, very calm, very relaxed in the cage. He doesn't seem to get rattled. He seems to stay very kind of zen. He stays very, which I think helps him helps him with his positional grappling, if you think about it, because I don't think he's very aware of what's going on. He's very aware of his that term proprioception again. If I'm proprioception, I think I'm saying that right. As far as being aware of where his body is, being aware of where his limbs are in relation to his opponent's body and that sort of thing. I think he stays quite calm and quite aware of that sort of thing in the ring, in the cage, which is kind of cool to see. The CJ Vergara, on the other hand, is one of those guys who he doesn't really have a particular area where his skill set stands out. When you watch CJ Vergara, you're not going to get your hair blown back by any specific thing that he's doing technically or skill wise. He's really one of those guys who's more so he's reasonably well rounded, and he's just tough and scrappy and fearless and aggressive. He's the kind of guy who he's going to put pace and pressure on you. He's going to put volume on you from the moment the horn sounds. He's not going anywhere. He's just going to stay in your face and try to make you uncomfortable and try to throw you off your game with pace and pressure and volume. Even like I said, Tyra's 22 years old. He's had a lot of fights, but it was against lower level competition. So I do wonder, even though I do think Tatsuro Tyra is by far the more skilled mixed martial artist of the two, I do wonder whether that pace and that pressure of CJ Vergara is something that's going to throw off a younger kid like Tyra. I don't know. That's something that we kind of have to wait and see. It's kind of a show me thing here. Um, but yeah, I lean toward thinking, even if Vergara is coming forward, trying to pressure Tyra, I think Tyra's probably going to be able to, just grapple him in those situations. I think he's going to be able to shoot a takedown, or like I said, even just tie up with him and potentially, scramble to his back from there or something. Like I do think he's going to be the better, uh, the better fighter overall. Um, that said, I don't just because of the things that I just mentioned, I don't like the idea of betting Tyra at minus 220, minus 240, minus 250, anything like that. If I was gonna put a bet on this fight, I would be looking more so toward the Vergara side, getting him at 2-1. I do think the value is probably, now this fight's gonna start and Tyra's gonna get him out in there in round one, and I'm gonna look like an idiot. But I do think on paper, to me, the value is on Vergara. If I was gonna bet it, I'd bet Vergara. But as for a pick, I'm picking Tyra to win. Next up, we've got Piera Rodriguez versus Sam Hughes. Piera Rodriguez at about minus 200, Sam Hughes at plus 165. I think that's actually, I think you can get Sam's at like plus one. She's more like plus 140. Okay, she does show at plus 150 in spots, but yeah, more like plus 140. Piera Rodriguez minus 155, minus 165, that sort of thing. I think this is an interesting fight. Sam Hughes, she almost started to turn into one of those joke fighters a little bit. I think, like, what did she lose, 3 in a row? I think, and people were kind of the way people talk about Julia Stoliarenko, call her Stolia Stinko and stuff like that. Like Sam Hughes was kind of one of those fighters that people were like, she's not very good and probably shouldn't be in the UFC. But after dropping 3, she's won her last 2 in a row, and I think she started to figure out what she needs to do to win fights at this level, namely being that she needs to wrestle, right? Let me see if I have these numbers in front of me. I have them in my notes somewhere, but I can't sit here and make you wait for me while I look through them and figure out where they are. But if I remember correctly, she only attempted like 3 takedowns in her first 3 UFC fights or something like that. And then in her last 2 fights, the ones that she won, if I remember correctly, she attempted 12 takedowns and got 6 of them. So, hopefully she and her team have figured out, like, hey, when we push the wrestling, we actually win some fights here. Like that's what Sam Hughes is good at. She's on the feet, she's capable, she's scrappy, she'll get in there and mix it up, but she's not necessarily excellent on the feet. I don't know that she's necessarily an excellent wrestler either, but she's a decent wrestler, and she will push her opponents against the cage, grind on them, wear on them, take them down. I do think that's where she does her best work. Piera Rodriguez, she's not. I'm not super impressed with her so far. I think she's somebody who can still impress me, and I know there are some people who are really impressed with her. I probably just need to see a little more. Maybe this is the fight where she'll come out and be impressive. I hope not, because I'm gonna, spoiler alert. I've got a bet on Sam Hughes here. We'll be getting to that, but from what I watched on the tape on Rodriguez, she's not a real dynamic athlete, but she does seem pretty strong and pretty physical. What I mean by dynamic, I don't know that she doesn't really use a lot of movement. She's not necessarily super quick, super explosive, but she does seem pretty strong and just kind of physical and powerful. She doesn't put out a lot of volume on the feet. She kind of tries to pick her spots and sit down on her punches a little bit more rather than really like being dynamic and using a lot of movement and volume. She did show some takedown defense in her Kay Hansen fight, which was her one UFC fight so far. But Hansen was able to time some takedowns well and get Rodriguez down a few times in that fight. Late in the fight, if I remember correctly, late in the fight, I think maybe in round 2 and in round 3, I think Piera did get Kay Hansen down as well. So, I mean, she's capable of wrestling herself. Um, Kay Hansen did have some wrestling success against Piera, and I think Sam Hughes she's bigger and probably stronger than Kay Hansen, a little more physical, I think. I do think Sam Hughes probably will be able to have some wrestling success here. That doesn't necessarily mean that she's going to be taking Piera down and holding her down for long spells or dominating her on the ground or anything, but I do think that she'll be able to probably wrestle effectively or at least hold her own there. Overall, I see this fight playing out more closely than Piera Rodriguez being a 2-1 and Sam Hughes being like a plus 165, plus 170. Like I said, I think she's more like plus 140, 150 now. But I see this fight as pretty close to a coin flip, to be honest with you. And when I finished the tape, Sam Hughes was at plus 170. So I did bet her there. I bet her last time out too. I bet her against Elise Reed, but I bet her by decision. I got greedy. I bet her by decision, and then she ended up finishing Elise Reed with, excuse me, I think only like a minute or two left in the fight. I could be wrong, but it was in the third round, and there wasn't much time left. So I'm not going to get greedy this time. Well, I take that back. I did get greedy a little bit, but I put a unit on Sam Hughes's money line at plus 170, and then I also put a little tiny sprinkle on her to finish in round three, which was at like plus 2,500. And then I put a tiny little sprinkle on her to finish by decision, which was plus 225 maybe. We'll look at all this, when I get to the end here. But yeah, and you think I've got a unit and a half total out on Sam Hughes. Doesn't mean I'm confident in her winning here. It just means I think the fight is closer than that, and I like the lines on her. As for a pick, I don't know. A lot of times I don't even bother giving a pick, but you know what? Screw it. I'm gonna go ahead and pick Sam Hughes. I'm gonna pick Sam Hughes to win here. I think it's a coin flip. When I get right down to it, I might even favor her slightly. So we'll see. We'll see what she's able to do. Okay, the next fight, Joe Anderson Brito versus Lucas Alexander. When I did the tape, either this fight wasn't on the card or I just missed it. When I typed up my notes, this one wasn't on the card yet or whatever. I think it might have just gotten finalized within the last day or two. So I didn't do any tape on this fight, and I don't know anything about it. And there you go. I'm never going to bullshit you and try to pretend I know what I'm talking about. It's like, yeah, I know a little bit about Joe Anderson Brito. I've seen him fight, but I didn't watch the tape. I don't know anything about Lucas Alexander, so I'm just going to skip this one. And you can get your breakdowns for this fight elsewhere because I don't know anything. Next up, we've got Nick Maximov versus Jacob Malkoon. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on this fight. I did do the tape, but the conclusion I came to is not very strong, I guess, basically. Yeah, these odds have moved a little. It shows Maximov minus 160. I don't think that's accurate anymore either. Let's take a look. Maximov more like minus 130, Malkoon plus 125. Actually, in like plus 115 in spots, that sort of thing. I'll do a brief, breakdown of their skills. I think it's pretty obvious if you've watched them fight, but these guys are both guys who butter their bread with wrestling, but they're both kind of standout wrestlers in that they're the kind of wrestlers who really do relentlessly look to wrestle and go for takedowns. So often we see fighters who are very good wrestlers who just don't really use their wrestling. These guys are not that. They both average. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think if you go look at the written breakdown I was talking about on the Never Hedge Substack, I think I put the numbers in there, but they both average something like, I can't remember. That seems like too many, but I swear they average like 10 or 12 takedown attempts per fight or something. That might be wrong, but don't quote me on that. But yeah, but they both, they're both guys that I think average actually landing something like 5 or 6 takedowns per fight or so. Which also means that they're not getting the takedowns and keeping people down. It means that people are getting up because they're having to take them down again. But even so, my point being that they're both good wrestlers and they both will relentlessly push the wrestling. And so because and one thing I do want to mention, we have seen so many times over the years, maybe not so much anymore, but it used to always be a joke amongst UFC fans that, oh, two good wrestlers are fighting each other. That means it's going to be a crappy kickboxing fight. So often we'd see two really good grapplers and they'd sort of cancel each other out and they just wouldn't end up grappling. I did make a post on Twitter asking if people thought that was going to happen in this fight, and pretty much everybody said no. Everybody's like, nah, these guys don't know how to do anything but grapple. We've been proven wrong about that in the past, but even so, I do tend to agree that I do think these guys are probably going to look to grapple here. And because of that, I think it's important that we bear in mind that Nick Maximov is 3 inches taller and has 3 inches of reach and has fought up as high as heavyweight. I mean, that was on the Contender Series. He weighed in at 209, right? Stockton represent. But it doesn't mean he's not a heavyweight by any means, not even really a light heavyweight. I mean, I think 185 is definitely where he belongs, but he does have a little bit of size on Jacob Malkoon. And Malkoon, he's 5'9", and not a chubby guy by any means, but he's not super ripped up either. He's not super shredded. He's a guy who carries a little bit of fat on him. He could probably fight at 170 if he wanted to. Maybe he even has, I don't know. But Maximov will be the bigger and probably probably the stronger and more physical guy here. So that's something to keep in mind. But I think another thing that sets them apart is I think, neither guy is a great striker, but I think Malkoon is probably the better striker of the two. So I end up seeing this fight as a little bit of a coin flip. And so it's the kind of spot where if I was going to bet it, I would just go with the plus money. Malkoon sits at like plus 115, plus 120 now. I don't really like that. I think after I finished doing the tape on this fight, I think I put in my notes, I would need either guy to be at like plus 150 before I'd be comfortable betting them. But one thing that I did take a look at that I don't mind here is you can get Jacob Malkoon by decision. I do think this fight goes to decision. These guys are both like, neither one is a knockout artist. Um, Neither one is a huge submission threat either. I mean, Jacob Malkoon is allegedly Robert Whitaker's jiu-jitsu coach. Nick Maximov works with the Diaz brothers, but in the end, they're both mostly, wrestlers and positional grapplers. They're, with strong top control, but not necessarily somebody that's going to snatch up a sub on you. So I really do think this fight probably goes the distance. So if I were going to bet either guy, I would feel pretty comfortable betting them by decision if I'm getting that extra juice there, which, Malkoon's money line being plus 115, his decision prop being plus 185. I don't mind that. If I was going to bet it, that's probably where I'd be looking. Otherwise, another way that you could approach this fight is use the over 2.5 or the fight goes the distance as a parlay piece potentially. Because I do think it's pretty juiced. I don't have it in front of me, but I think it's like minus 220, something like that, maybe somewhere in that range anyway. Okay. Next, we've got Rafael Assunção versus Victor Henry. It's kind of an interesting fight. I was listening to a podcast. I forget what the heck it's called, but it's a podcast where the guys who host it, they do a thing where they haven't looked at the odds yet. And the guy who's hosting it, there's one guy who's hosting who does know the odds, and he's hosting for the other two guys who are like in a competition against each other, and they guess what the odds are on fights without knowing. And both of the guys thought that Rafael Assunção was going to be favored here, and he's plus 260. Actually, I think he's even wider than that now. This shows Victor Henry at minus 315. Victor Henry's at like minus 330, minus 340 in some spots now. Oh, wow. Wow, the best okay, yeah, this moved a lot. The best he's at now is minus 350. He's out there at like minus 400, minus 500. Rafael Assunção, the best you can find him at is plus 315. The first thing I want to say about this fight is if this fight was happening even maybe 2 or 3 years ago, especially, and if we go back further, if we go back 5+ years, Rafael Assunção would be minus 800 here. He'd be minus 1,000 here, maybe. I mean, it would be ridiculous if this fight was happening just a couple of years ago. The only reason we're seeing such a wide line here on Victor Henry is because Rafael Assunção is a 40-year-old bantamweight. If you're a heavyweight or a light heavyweight at 40 years old, you can still get away with quite a bit. I mean, you can still fight at a pretty high level, well into your 40s, even at those higher weight classes. But the reason for that is because the first thing to go is your speed, your reaction time, and those things don't matter as much at heavyweight. They matter a whole lot at 125, 135, 145, the smaller weight classes. If Rafael Assunção is, I think, okay, I've got some notes here. His UFC record is 11-6. He has wins over TJ Dillashaw, Pedro Munoz, Aljamain Sterling, Marlon Moraes, Rob Font. When you get right down to it, I don't think it's unreasonable to call Rafael Assunção one of the best bantamweights in history, and probably one of the most underrated bantamweights, certainly, and maybe one of the most underrated UFC fighters. Period. He's a guy who never really gets talked about as being right up there as one of the best, but when he was at his very best, I think he was. That said, he's on like a 3 or 4 fight losing streak now. I think it was his most recent fight was Ricky Simone. He got knocked out, so he might be, not that Ricky Simone doesn't hit hard, he does, but we might be seeing Assunção's chin start to go, which it does sometimes happen as you get up there, around 40 years of age. So yeah, like if this was a prime Assunção, the line would be flipped, except Assunção would be an even bigger favorite. But yeah, the reason that we're seeing such a big line here on Victor Henry is because, like, Assunção's getting older, and also because if we look at Victor Henry's style, It's exactly the kind of style that works against a fighter who's slowing down and a little bit older. And Rafael Sensao was never like a super high paced kind of guy anyway. And that's what Victor Henry brings above anything else is a lot of pace, a lot of pressure, a lot of volume. Um, he Let's see. I've got some notes on him here. And also one thing that I think is being overlooked is Victor Henry is himself 35 years old. He just made his UFC debut in in an underdog win against Tony Barcelos. He was 34 years old when he did that. He has since turned 35. He's got almost 30 pro fights under his belt. He's a well traveled journeyman, I guess I would call him. And I don't necessarily mean journeyman as a put down, but I mean he's a guy who's just kind of making it to the UFC now in his mid 30s, that kind of thing. I think it's fair to use that term. Um, yeah, he was like a 4-1 underdog to Tony Barcelos, and he ended up beating Barcelos largely by just outworking him for 15 minutes, which I think he can do here. On the feet, he's fearless. He's really active. He puts out a lot of volume. He doesn't allow you to get comfortable. Kind of like the same thing I was saying about CJ Vergara. In his fight against Barcelos, Victor Henry attempted 397 strikes in 15 minutes. So that's impressive volume. As far as the matchup between the two, the final point I'll make is this. Rafael Assunção is the more skilled martial artist of the two. The better fighter in that regard. As far as the actual skills that they have, Rafael Assunção is a more skilled martial artist than Victor Henry. However, that isn't always who ends up winning the fight, right? And especially with the X factors at work here, with the Assunção being older and slowing down, with Victor Henry being the kind of guy who's going to put out volume and just never let the older fighter who's potentially slowing down really get his game going. I do think we see Victor Henry just outwork Assunção here to either a decision or possibly even a late death by 1,000 cuts type of TKO stoppage. That said, I don't love the line. Like I said, yeah, we looked at this. I mean, yeah, he's up minus 350, minus 400. Man, I wouldn't. But even with the Assunção slowing down the way he is, we're talking about a very skilled, very wily veteran here who has skills that are above and beyond what Victor Henry is accustomed to dealing with, even though he did just beat Tony Barcelos. So like this is another one of those spots where if I was going to take the shot, I think the value is on the dog here, but it's going to be a stay away for me. It's like, man, at what point do I? Oh, this line, it's like plus 350. Man, I don't know. At what point do I have to? All right, that's it. I got to take the shot on a Assunção. I don't know, but I'm going to stay away for now. Next, Amanda Martinez versus Brandon Davis. I feel like every week there's a fight where I do the tape and I just don't feel like I have much of a read. That's this fight for me this week. I'm not going to say much about this because I just don't feel like I have that much to say. Brandon Davis was a guy who had a UFC run a few years back. He went like don't quote me on this. He went like 2-5. That doesn't sound right. I can't remember. I'm not going to pull it up and look right now, but anyway, he washed out of the organization, and then he had like he won like 3 or 4 fights outside the organization in regional competition against like some decent regional competition. The UFC brought him back, and in his return fight, he got KO'd in round 1 versus Dana Batgari. One thing about Brandon Davis is he's always been a fighter who, if I'm remembering correctly, he's always been a fighter who's kind of like relied on his toughness. He's a guy who's been able to get in the storm, take a lot, and give it right back. And the fact that he got finished in round 1, I mean, does that mean he's fading, or does it just mean Dana Batgari hits very hard? Because we know that's true. So it could be both. We don't know. But Mana Martinez here, minus 160. Brandon Davis, plus 135. Mana Martinez is a guy that I'm not. That's why, like I said, I don't have a strong read on this fight. I'm not sure what to think about either of these guys yet. Mana Martinez can be very good. He's got some good things going for him. In his most recent fight when he fought Ronnie Lawrence, he got out wrestled. He got taken down 6 times on 7 attempts, if I remember correctly, and he got knocked down like 3 times. He did knock down Ronnie Lawrence in round 3, if I remember correctly, but he got knocked down by punches from Ronnie Lawrence on 3, if not 4 different occasions in that fight. So that's a little concerning. That's all I'm going to say about this fight. This is a spot where I just don't feel like I have a strong enough read on either guy or how the dynamic between them is going to play out that I'm willing to do anything here. This is a show me spot. I want to see what each of these guys is capable of against each other so I can make a little bit more of a read before I'm going to be comfortable betting on them. So I'm not going to say anything more about that. I will say this: Mana Martinez hits very hard. The kid can crack. If Brandon Davis's chin is compromised at this point, if the Dana Green knockout was a sign of that, then we could see Mana Martinez get Brandon Davis out of there early. But it's not something I'm going to be willing to bet on at this point in time. Next up, we've got. I just heard my cat. He must be outside the giant. Are you in here, buddy? I don't think he is. Up to Misha Cirkunov versus Alonzo Menifield. It's kind of an interesting fight. Let's see. It shows minus 220 plus 180. I think reasonably accurate. Misha Cirkunov. So we've got Menifield minus 200 up until like minus 225, minus 235. Best line on Cirkunov plus 182. Also, it's reasonably accurate. Where the heck was I? This one. These guys are both, 34, 35, getting up there a little bit. Misha Cirkunov, used to fight at 205 in the UFC, dropped down to 185 for a while. He's going back up to 205 here. As far as a skills breakdown, Cirkunov is a guy that I I had kind of high expectations for him at one point in time, but he ended up being a little bit of a bust. He's obviously he's a very good grappler. I think again, I'm going off the top of my head here. I don't have this right in front of me, but I think he has 6 UFC wins and 5 of them are by submission, something like that. So he is a venomous grappler when he can get somebody there and work, but his fragility has always been an issue. I think he's been knocked out. I think I have this in front of me. He's been knocked out in the first round 4 times in the UFC. So that's definitely like, that fragility that we're talking about. And Alonzo Menifield is exactly the kind of guy who, if you're a fighter who is prone to getting knocked out in the first round, Alonzo Menifield is a guy who can be the 5th person to do that. That's something that Alonzo Menifield is, he was a guy who excelled at football and track in high school and in college. Eventually switched to MMA. He's one of those guys he's just an athletic specimen. He's just extremely athletic, extremely physical. Probably one of those guys who could have just kind of picked whatever sport and made it to the highest level at it. He's a fantastic athlete. And so really, I don't mind Menifield at as a parlay piece, maybe at like minus 200, but there is always the possibility that Cirkunov can get him down and find a sub. I don't find that to be extremely likely. I think the most likely outcome in this fight is Menifield to find an early KO, probably find that round 1 KO. However, I think the under 1.5 is a potentially a good bet here. I don't have the line in front of me at the moment, but I'm trying to remember which one. Or wait, I'll look at it here because I do here. I think I bet that Cirkunov Alonzo Menifield under 1.5 rounds was at minus 105. That's what I bet it at. I don't still at that or not, but if it's around there, I think that's a pretty good bet because we've got a guy with heavy hands who tends to get early finishes and a guy who tends to get finished early. And then if we want to look at it the other way, Menifield is not necessarily a great grappler. He's okay. He's got at least one submission win of his own. But if it does go to the ground early when they're both dry, we could see Cirkunov potentially find that sub as well. So I think the under 1.5 is a good way to go here. That's the way I decided to go with this one. Speaking of under 1.5, let's talk about Dusko Todorovic versus Jordan Wright. Obviously, the Beverly Hills Ninja is a guy that he's a round 1 or bust fighter. My wife just walked in. He's a round 1 or bust fighter. He always has been. He's a guy who is in something like 15 fights. I think he's been out of the first round like once or twice. I hope I'm not mixing him up with somebody else there, but I know he's rarely, if ever, been outside of the first round. He's a guy who comes out like a house on fire, looking to get you out of there. And if he can't get you out of there, chances are you're going to get him out of there. His last fight was against Marc-Andre Barrios, and he did actually actively look to do some grappling there. Usually he just kind of comes out and, he's called the Beverly Hills Ninja. He usually just comes out and does ninja shit, but he actually came out and looked to do some grappling. He looked decent. In my written breakdown for this fight this week, I said, and I don't know how willing I am to take this to the bank, but I said I think Jordan Wright might actually be a, a reasonably technically skilled fighter, like more so than we think he is. He might actually have a pretty complete game. He just doesn't pace himself in a way that allows him to show it. The way he fights doesn't allow for him to really show what he's capable of, because he's just like, well, we're getting this over with. Either I'm finishing you or you're finishing me in the first couple minutes, and that's just the way it's going to go. But if he's a guy, obviously, there is some fragility that appears to be an issue, because if he doesn't finish you, he gets finished. But yeah, if he's a guy who could just kind of learn to slow down a little bit, learn to pace himself differently, learn to extend to that cardio, learn some defense, so he's not, so that if he does have some fragility issues, that he's those aren't coming to bear quite as much. But anyway, I forgot. Let me scroll to my notes here and see what the heck I was actually going to talk about for this fight. I think I may have said most of it already. Oh, I didn't talk about Dusko. Dusko's pretty well rounded. He's a decent striker. He's a good grappler. He can be a little bit fragile. We've seen him finished in the first round a couple times. So I think the UFC knows what they're doing in putting this fight together. If Jordan Wright is the kind of guy that if he's going to get a win, he's usually going to get a first round knockout. Dusko Todorovic is a guy who can be knocked out in the first round, right? We've seen that happen. Dusko is also a guy who can get a first round finish. Jordan Wright is the kind of guy who's can fall apart and be susceptible to that. I think the under 1.5 is the best way to go here, because one way or another, somebody's probably getting the finish in the first round. Here's what I did with this fight. This shows Dusko at -190. I think that is a little bit wider now. Okay, well, it shows him -189, but yeah, he's more like -200, -205, that kind of thing in all spots. I put 1.85 units on Dusko's money line at -185. And not because I'm super confident in him to win, but my thought was this. Whenever Jordan Wright is fighting, you can pretty confidently bet his opponent's money line and then just hedge on him with the round 1 KO prop, right? So I put 1.85 units on Dusko's money line, and when Jordan Wright's round 1 KO prop dropped, it was at +800, which is a great number. So I put a little bit on that to hedge. So if this fight gets into round 2 and Jordan Wright gets a finish in round 2, yeah, that's going to be a problem. Then I lose both those bets. But I tried to strategically pick some spots that I think are going to work out for me there. So we'll see how that goes. Just a few fights left, folks. Next up, we've got Askarov versus Brandon Royval at 125 pounds. Let's see. It shows Askar. Let's see if those odds are correct. Askar -225. Brandon Royval can be had for as high as +225. Oh, I can tell I haven't done a video in a while. My throat's getting sore. Just 1 second. Let me scroll to my notes on this. I'm way out of practice, you guys. I'm usually so smooth. Not really, but a little worse than usual today. Okay, so Askarov, obviously, he's got that OV at the end of his name. You can make the guess that he's a dominant wrestler and grappler, and he is. He's got a string of really impressive wins in the UFC before dropping his last fight to Kai Kara France in a closely contested decision. Some people thought Askar won that fight. I don't know. It was a toss up to me. I don't know. I don't tend to. This is neither here nor there, but I actually kind of hate when people ask me like, "Oh, how did you score that fight?" Because I'm like, I didn't. I'm not a judge. Like, I don't. Maybe some people just automatically watch fights and score them in their head. I don't do that. And also, if you've watched my videos a lot, you know that I have a terrible short-term memory. So like, I would literally have to be writing the scores down, because by the time round 3 is happening, like if you ask me what happened in round 1, how did you score round 1? I'd be like, I don't know. I don't remember what happened in round 1. Yeah, I can't remember anything unless I write it down. So I do not recall if I felt that Askarov or Kai Kara France won that fight. In fact, I probably never even made that determination in the first place. But that's neither here nor there. Askarov he only completed 2 takedowns on 14 attempts in that fight. Kai Kara France has excellent takedown defense. Especially against a good striker, if Askarov is not able to get those takedowns, it's going to be a problem for him. However, Askarov is, he's certainly a serviceable striker himself. Definitely not a fish out of water on the feet, but it's just, that's why where Kai Kara France butters his bread. So it was a difficult task for Askarov since he was not able to take Kai Kara France down. Um, excuse me. Askarov, he's not the most explosive wrestler in the world. He's not necessarily the guy who's shooting from halfway across the cage and just and getting there in a split second and blasting your legs out from under you. Not necessarily like super explosive like that, but he's very relentless and he's very technically sound. And what I think what really works for him is I just think he has such high level technique. You know, even if he's not able to shoot in and with that big double that just rips you to the ground all at once, he'll be able, he'll clinch with his opponent, he'll push him to the cage, and then once he gets you to the cage, I think he has little technical wrinkles that people aren't accustomed to seeing. I'm not a wrestler myself. I did wrestle for a little while in high school, but I don't have like high level knowledge of wrestling technique, so I can't really like break it down. But from what I see from Askarov, that's what I think is happening a lot of the time is that he just has he has a really high level understanding of just the little wrinkles of going for these takedowns as far as if like if we think about the way judo works with the kazoosh, the off balance, as far as somebody who's an excellent wrestler or an excellent judoka, they get really good at feeling where their opponent's weight and momentum is going and figuring out how to, like, okay, I can move in such a way to get you to sort of lean in this direction, and then I can take you in that direction and that kind of thing. And I think Askarov is really good at those little technical wrinkles. To borrow a phrase from Paul Shaughnessy from the Dogger Pass podcast, Brandon Royval is a bit of a shit-eating wild man. I think that we can agree on that. He has high-level skills. He's well-rounded. He moves very well on the feet. He moves very well on the ground. But he kind of just goes a little wild, right? Especially on the feet. I mean, he tends to just he throws in such a way where he puts himself kind of out of position, puts himself kind of off balance, which is the kind of thing that Askarov is going to be able to take advantage of for the reasons I was just talking about. He has those technical wrinkles where he's able to take advantage of those off balance situations and that kind of thing. However, Brandon Royval is an he scrambles really well. He's a good positional grappler, and he's great at what's the word I'm looking for? My wife just opened the door and threw me off my thought there. He's opportunistic. That's the word I'm looking for. He's a good opportunistic grappler. He scrambles a lot. He finds himself in different positions, and he knows how to go for submissions from a variety of different positions, a variety of different angles. He can be in like a weird scramble, and he can scoop up a submission, that kind of thing. However, Askarov is the kind of guy who knows how to keep it tight on the ground, how to keep himself out of trouble. He's already fought several venomous grapplers in his career and has been able to just keep it tight, keep it technical, apply, good heavy top pressure while staying tight enough to not allow his opponent to really get much going. So, Royval will be dangerous on the ground, but I think Askarov will be able to handle those things. So, I don't mind Askarov as a parlay piece, although it's a little bit risky. I think if you're gonna bet Royval, personally, I would either bet his sub prop or bet him inside the distance. It's hard for me to see him winning this fight by decision. Certainly not impossible, but I think, to me, the most likely outcome is Askarov by decision or possibly a late finish. If it does go to decision, or maybe if you have access to a book that has the finish only, like the distance no action type of prop, where you would take that bet on Brandon Royval, and that means if he wins inside the distance, you win your bet. If the fight goes to decision, no matter who wins, it's a push and you get your bet back. That is potentially a good bet to take here. Actually, I'm gonna take a look at that one myself. I hadn't even thought about that before, but yeah, I'm gonna pick Askarov here, probably by decision. Only a couple fights left. All right, we're almost 50 minutes in. We should be able to finish up in an hour or so. Total, not an hour from now. I'm not going to break down these next two fights for a half hour each. Next up, we've got Jonathan Martinez versus Cub Swanson. Get here for the odds. Martinez minus 200, Cub Swanson plus 182. This is kind of a tough fight. It's a tough to break down. It's tough to know what to do with it simply because once a fighter starts to get, especially at these lower weight classes, when a fighter starts to get to a certain age, it's just, even if you have just seen them fight not that long ago, like, okay, Cub Swanson's last fight against Darren Elkins, he looked great. He had, I mean, he did get hit a couple times, but he had like almost a flawless performance against a very tough and scrappy guy. I mean, he was able to get Darren Elkins, who has, you know, traditionally been extremely durable. He always takes a lot of damage. He always gets beat up, but he's hard to get out of there. He got Darren Elkins out of there in what? I think it was 2 minutes, 12 seconds, something like that. He looked great in that fight. So even though he's 38 years old, which is getting older for these weight classes, but the other concern I have is not only is he still fighting in a lower weight class at 38 years old, he's dropping from featherweight to bantamweight for this fight. He's dropping a weight class at 38 years old, which is definitely a little bit concerning to me. But it's like, when you're capping fights, what you see on the tape always has to be, always has to be the number one factor that you're considering, right? And then if there are things like age and weight cut and stuff, like, you kind of have to figure out how much to take that stuff into account. And like, based on the tape alone, I think this is could be a decent fight for Cub Swanson. I think he still looks pretty good. So those concerns about his age and the weight cut, it depends on how much you want to take those things into account. But Cub is still, he's still dangerous. Obviously he still hits hard. He's still, his reaction times still seem to be there. He still seemed to have it, so to speak, in his last fight. Jonathan Martinez, they call him the Dragon. There's only one Dragon, you guys. Lyoto Machida will always be the Dragon to me. But one other thing I wanted to say about Cub before we move on. Even though he did look good in his last fight, he's 5-5 in his last 10, which doesn't look great. But he had a 4-fight losing streak, and let's look at who Cub Swanson lost to in that 4-fight losing streak: Brian Ortega, Frankie Edgar, Hanato Moicano, and Shane Burgos. That's a killer's row. That's a murderer's row there, right? That's a pretty tough 4 fights in a row. So we can certainly forgive him for dropping those 4 fights in a row. Jonathan Martinez, he's put together a 7-3 record in the UFC so far. Pretty impressive since debuting in late 2018. So he's fought quite a few times. He's currently fighting a 3-fight win streak. He's a tight and technical striker who, he feints well. He switches stances a lot. He lands real hard leg kicks inside and outside. Like, I see this fight as on the feet. I think, well, let me look at their size difference. Is he quite a bit bigger? No, he's not. No, they're the same size. Okay. I thought maybe Martinez would have some size here, but well, I guess it makes sense because Swanson's coming down a weight class. But for some reason, I thought Jonathan Martinez was a little taller, but he's not. So I see this fight playing out mostly on the feet. These guys can both wrestle, but they don't necessarily look to actively do so all that often. I see this fight mostly playing out on the feet, and I think it could be pretty close. And considering that, I already forgot what Cub can be had for plus 170, plus 180, I think, right? Yeah, plus 170, plus 180. I haven't made a bet on this. I wouldn't trust Jonathan Martinez. At minus 200 or so, I wouldn't parlay him. I don't feel comfortable with that. If you do, hey, more power to you. But I think Cub is still too good and still too dangerous for me to trust Jonathan Martinez. I don't want to call him unproven. He's 7-3 in the UFC, but that's against lower level competition. I think this fight, even with Cub being 38 and coming down a weight class, is probably closer than those odds would suggest. This is one of those situations where I have not taken a shot on Cub yet, but if I was going to, choose a money line side here, gun to my head, I have to bet it. I'm absolutely betting the Cub Swanson side. And even though I don't have a gun to my head and I don't have to bet it, there's a chance that I'm going to. There's always that 10 years though, right? I don't remember what the exact stat is, but fighters who are 10 years younger win like 68% of the time or something. Don't quote me on that because I can't remember the exact number. But so yeah, this is one of those spots. I can see why Martinez is favored. I get it. But I just don't know if he should be favored as much as he is. And I would caution anyone who is looking to parlay Martinez at that number against one of the greats in Cub Swanson, even if he is 38 years old. All right, that's all I have to say about one fight left. I'm losing my voice. Let's get it. Let's get her done. I wish I hadn't said that just now. Sorry, but I did. Oh, what are the odds? Okay, so Grasso minus 215. She's even out there at like minus 240, minus 245. Viviane Araujo plus 192. We can get almost 2 to 1 on her there. So the basic breakdown of this fight, Alexa Grasso is good. Alexa Grasso has always been good, but since coming up to 125, I think we've seen even more from her. Traditionally, she's been thought of as a crisp and technical counter boxer, right? That's largely what she is. She's a good boxer, good kickboxer, good striker. But she's been showing some wrinkles in that game, right? Was it her? Was JoJo Wood her last fight? I think so. Where she was able to take JoJo Wood down, and she found a rear naked choke in round one, if I remember correctly. I always have to say if I remember correctly because my memory is shot, and half the time I can't remember if what I'm remembering is right or not. But I think that Grasso found the rear naked choke in round one there, which sure, JoJo Wood is nearing the end of her career. JoJo Wood isn't what she used to be, arguably, but still, that's an impressive win over a solid and high level fighter in the 125-pound weight class. Viviane Araujo. Viviane Araujo. She's good, and I kind of don't know why the line is the way it is a little bit, to be honest with you. I guess I kind of do. I think it largely comes down to cardio concerns with Vivi, right? I mean, that's really the only thing I can come up with. I'm gonna have to listen to some other podcasts this week. I try not to listen to too much until I get my video out, so it doesn't color my opinions. But I do want to kind of hear what other people have to say about this fight, as far as whether they feel. Let me know in the comments too. Like, do you feel that Alexa Grasso should be a 2 to 1 favorite over Viviane Araujo? And if so, let me know why. Because I'm having little bit of a hard time seeing that being the case. I think Araujo is the more dangerous fighter. Araujo she's a good grappler. I think she's a better athlete. I think she's probably stronger, more physical, more explosive, more powerful than Grasso. She's a better grappler, a better wrestler. But yeah, the concern being that she does tend to kind of horsepower things. She uses a lot of horsepower, which can slow her down after around some at some point in the second round or so. Maybe she does tend to kind of slow down, but she's also one of those fighters who fights pretty well. Some fighters, we see them slow down, like when we say they gas, like, oh, he's got gas tank problems, he or she has gas tank problems. That can mean that's a continuum. To say gas tank problems doesn't mean one thing. There's a continuum of what gas tank issues look like. There are fighters who gas out and are just done for and can't fight anymore, basically, and there are fighters who get tired and just fight tired, and they just fight tired like all the time. They just always look like they're on the verge of just gassing out and being done for, but they still continue to fight and fight well. And Viviane Araujo she's kind of one of those fighters. She does slow down, she does become less dangerous and less effective, but she fights through it pretty well. And I don't think we've seen her in a 5-round fight in the UFC, if I remember correctly. Have we? Let me know in the comments if I'm wrong about that, but I don't think we've seen her in a 5-round fight. Um, I think it's reasonable to expect that Grasso is going to have the better cardio here if we get into round 3, round 4, round 5. But it's also reasonable to expect that Araujo is going to fight well through it, even if she does have cardio issues, even if she does slow down quite a bit. She's not one of those fighters who's just dead in the water. So I guess in that regard, I get it. So maybe, like, it might be a good spot. It might be a good spot to treat as a live betting spot, right? Like, if like I do understand why Grasso's favored. I think 2 to 1 might be a bit much. So maybe a good way to approach this fight, if Araujo is going to have success, it's probably going to be early, right? It's probably going to be round 1, round 2. So maybe let round 1 play out. Araujo is probably going to get takedowns, probably going to be able to grapple effectively, maybe even get Grasso out of there. She might even be able to submit her in the first round or two. But if she can't, like, let's say we see Araujo come out, get a takedown on Grasso, find good positions. Maybe she gets to her back, but she's not able to get the choke or whatever, but she has a pretty dominant round. Maybe not quite 10-8, but a solid 10-9 moving toward a 10-8. Then we might be able to get a much better line on Grasso as we move into round 2 and as the fight moves on. So that's one way to look at this one. As for a pick, I will pick Grasso. I do think she should be favored, but yeah, I don't think I'm going to bet anything on this one pre-fight. I think I'm just going to wait and take a look at the live line. So yeah, that's about all I'm thinking on that one. Well, what the heck? Since I got the quick card in front of me here, maybe I'll go through. I know people do this sometimes. Maybe I'll go through and do like my quick picks just to make sure I even made a pick on every fight. Because since I'm an MMA gambler, that's why I make these videos and that's the way I approach it. And a lot of the time with gambling, it's largely about the numbers. It isn't even about picking a winner necessarily. So a lot of times I don't even think of it that way. Like I'll just be like, well, I think this guy has the best value on his line, and then I just kind of move on. But I know people like picks, so let's go ahead and do that. All right, Mike Jackson versus Pete Rodriguez. Got to go Pete Rodriguez there. Vergara versus Tyra. I'm gonna pick Tyra, but I think the betting value is probably on Vergara. Hughes versus Rodriguez. I'm gonna pick Hughes. I think it's a coin flip fight. I think the betting value's on Hughes, and maybe I'm a little crazy picking her, but I'm going to do it. Brito versus Alexander. I didn't do the tape on that, but I'm going to pick Brito. I know he's a pretty big favorite there. I don't really know anything about Lucas Alexander. Nick Maximov versus Jacob Malkoon. I am going to pick Maximov ever so slightly, but if I was going to bet it, I'd potentially bet Malkoon. This is a fight that I consider so much of a coin flip that I'd bet whoever was. I would just take whoever's at plus money if I was going to bet it. Asuncao versus Victor Henry. I am going to pick Victor Henry, but again, I think the betting value is probably on Asuncao. Mana Martinez versus Brandon Davis. I guess I'd bet Martinez if I don't have a strong read on that fight. Cirkunov versus Alonzo Menifield. Menifield's at like I'm picking Menifield for sure, and I probably would feel okay potentially using his money line on a parlay. But if I was going to bet him, I'd probably bet him to finish in round one or inside the distance, something like that. Todorovic versus Jordan Wright. I am going to pick Todorovic. Royval Askarov. I'm going to pick Askarov. Swanson versus Martinez. Oh, I think the betting value is squarely on Swanson. I'm trying to decide if I want to pick him outright. Well, if I pick him outright, then I have to bet him, right? So I'm going to do it. I'm going to pick Swanson. I'm going to pick Swanson, which I guess I have to bet him now, because if I'm willing to pick outright somebody who's sitting at like plus 175, you got to bet that, right? And finally, Grasso versus Araujo. I will pick Grasso, but I think that the pre-fight right now, the betting value is probably on Araujo, and I'm going to keep an eye on it live. See what I've got for bets so far. Oh, I should probably let me see if I can zoom that in a little bit. I just got a new computer and I'm still figuring out certain things about how to use it. Is that too big? No, that looks perfect actually. All right, so this is what I've got for bets so far. I've got 1.85 units on Dusko Tudorovic at minus 185 to win 1 unit. I put a unit on Sam Hughes at plus 170. Glad I did that when I did, because she's at like plus 140 now. Here's kind of a fun little violence parlay. Jackson Rodriguez under 1.5, Todorovic Wright under 1.5. I parlayed those 1 unit for plus 109. I parlayed Askarov at minus 185 and Menifield at minus 240. Menifield's line has actually improved there, but and Askarov's line has gotten worse. So I guess in the end, it ended up okay that I did it when I did it. Plus 118 for 1 unit. I got Cirkunov, Menifield under a round and a half at minus 105. I don't know if that's still sitting at that, but that seems like a crazy line to me. Almost a coin flip for a guy who gets a lot of first round finishes and a guy or other way around, a guy who gets first round finishes and a guy who gets finished in the first round. Anyway, Menifield by TKO round 1 plus 275. Usually I just go with like a sprinkle on those props like that, but I want a full unit on that one because I really think Menifield round 1 TKO is the most likely outcome for that fight. So I win a whole unit on that one. Hughes wins in round 3. I put 0.1 unit at plus 2,500. We just saw Hughes win in round 3 in her last fight. It was against Elise Reed, who is nowhere near the wrestler and grappler that Pira Rodriguez is, but even so, I went with 0.4 units on Hughes by decision at plus 225. And then, like I said, I had the straight money line play on Dusko up here, and I did have to go ahead. I mean, when you give me Wright by TKO round 1 at plus 800, that's basically his money line, right? That's the only way Jordan Wright wins fights. So yeah, I'm going to put a little sprinkle to hedge on that, because am I confident Dusko's going to win? No. The entire reason I felt comfortable making this play was because I knew that I would have the option of putting a sprinkle on this when it dropped, and so I did that. So That's where I'm at right now. Looking at my there's my here's my graph since I started. Oh, also I just hit 1 year. It's October 12th today. October 9th marked 1 year of me starting to track my MMA bets. Obviously, I've been betting on MMA. The first time I ever bet on MMA was the second fight between Randy Couture and Chuck Liddell. So a long time ago. I've been betting on MMA pretty consistently for, I guess I've been off and on for 10 plus years and then pretty consistently for the last handful of years, but I didn't actually start tracking until a year ago. But I went up and up and up, looking good, looking good, looking good. And ever since then, ever since here, wherever this is, it's been up and down, but same. Okay, so here I had 65.76 all these events, and now I'm at 66.9. So it's really been a lot of sideways for a long time. But hey, it's better than losing, right? I'm winning some, I'm losing some, but overall, kind of just pushing sideways. But if we look at how it's been since I started overall, since I started a year ago, I've made 66.9 units at 11% ROI. I don't love that, but it's all right. And I'm not complaining. The reason I say I don't love it is because I started October of last year, and in just October, November, December, I made 42 units in 2021 in 3 months. And so after doing that, I was like, man, if I can keep that same kind of thing up, there's no reason I can't make 100 units in 2022. And instead of making 100 units so far in 2022, I'm up about 24 to 25 units in 10 months or whatever. So, but winning is winning. I can't complain. I'm doing okay. So, anyway, that's all I've got for you. I've gone over an hour. I have talked long enough. Thank you so much for watching, gang. I am Erik with Erik Bets Fights. Make sure that you like this video. Make sure that you subscribe to Erik Bets Fights right here on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe on Never Hedge Media on YouTube as well. Please check me out on Twitter at Erik Bets Fights, on Instagram at Erik_Bets_Fights. You can find me all over the place. Say hi. I'm always down to talk about fights or whatever. I'm pretty much a lifelong MMA fan. This is the only thing I really I don't know, look like. To give you an example of how much of an MMA nerd I am, I didn't put this wall together as a backdrop for being a YouTuber. This is just what this room looked like, and there are more UFC posters. That's just how I decorate my house. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. I'm Erik with Erik Bets Fights, reminding you to play it. Oh man, it's been so long since I've done a video. I can't remember what my catchphrase is at the end. Play it smart, play it tight, and let's grow those bankrolls. Enjoy the fights at UFC Vegas 62 this weekend, everybody, and we'll see you soon. Thanks for watching.